Every result in Group G is under legal threat, not theoretically, not as a remote possibility that legal analysts are entertaining in academic journals. Actually, formally, and with a specific legal mechanism already activated that has the institutional authority to overturn, modify, or invalidate the group stage results that determined which nations advanced from Group G into the knockout rounds of the 2026 World Cup. Belgium advanced from Group G, Egypt advanced from Group G, New Zealand was eliminated from Group G. Every one of those outcomes rests on a foundation that Iran's formal legal challenge to the Court of Arbitration for Sport is now actively contesting. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport has the authority to rule in Iran's favor. Think about what that means for the teams currently competing in the knockout rounds whose path to this stage ran through Group G. Think about what it means for the teams who were eliminated in the group stage by opponents whose Group G results are now under active legal challenge. Think about what it means for FIFA's ability to present the 2026 World Cup as a legitimate sporting competition when the legitimacy of an entire group's results is being formally contested in an international legal forum while the tournament is still being played. This is not a hypothetical crisis. It is an active one. And the full story of how Iran's legal challenge works, what it is specifically arguing, what the Court of Arbitration for Sport can actually do with it, and what each possible outcome means for the tournament, for the teams affected, and for the future of international football governance is a story that the mainstream coverage has not told with the completeness it deserves. Here is that story. All of it. Subscribe right now if you have been following this situation, because what we are about to explain changes how you understand every knockout round match currently being played. Drop a comment telling us which outcome you think the CAS will produce. We are reading everyone and tracking every development, because when the ruling arrives, it will be the most consequential legal decision in the history of international football administration. And you need to understand exactly what is at stake before it lands. Part 1. Understanding the Court of Arbitration for Sport and why its authority matters. The Court of Arbitration for Sport is not a symbolic institution. It is not an advisory body whose recommendations FIFA can choose to implement or ignore based on institutional convenience. It is the binding international legal authority for disputes in international sport, and its rulings are enforceable through the Swiss Federal Tribunal, the national court system of the country where FIFA is headquartered, and where FIFA's legal obligations are therefore most directly binding. When FIFA created its institutional framework for international football governance, it agreed as a condition of operating as a globally recognized sporting body to accept the Court of Arbitration for Sport as the final binding arbitration authority for disputes arising from its decisions. That agreement is not optional, and it is not subject to FIFA's unilateral modification. It is a foundational element of the legal architecture that gives FIFA's decisions their institutional authority in the first place. FIFA's rulings carry weight because they are backed by a legal framework that includes CAS as its enforcement mechanism. That same framework gives CAS the authority to review and overturn FIFA's rulings when those rulings are found to be inconsistent with the legal standards that govern international sporting competition. Iran's legal challenge is filed under that framework. It is not a protest. It is not a political statement dressed in legal language. It is a formal legal filing that invokes the CAS's jurisdiction over FIFA's forfeit ruling and asks the court to determine whether that ruling was legally valid under the standards that govern FIFA's authority to apply its disciplinary framework to the specific circumstances of Iran's non-appearance. The CAS has three options when it receives a challenge of this nature. It can uphold FIFA's ruling in full, finding that the forfeit decision was legally valid and that the Group G results stand as recorded. It can overturn FIFA's ruling in full, finding that the forfeit decision was legally invalid and that the Group G results must be modified or nullified. Or it can modify FIFA's ruling, finding that certain elements of the decision were legally valid while others were not, and producing a partial remedy that adjusts the Group G results in ways that reflect the specific elements of the challenge it finds legally sound. Each of these outcomes has specific and dramatically different consequences for the tournament and for the institutional framework of international football. Understanding those consequences requires understanding what Iran's legal challenge is actually arguing, because the strength of each possible CAS outcome depends entirely on the legal quality of Iran's arguments. Part 2. What Iran's legal challenge is specifically arguing. Iran's formal filing with the Court of Arbitration for Sport makes 4 specific legal arguments. Each argument is independent in the sense that the CAS could find some arguments legally sound and others not. But they are also cumulative in the sense that each argument that the CAS finds legally sound strengthens the overall case for the remedy that Iran is seeking. The first argument is procedural. Iran is arguing that FIFA's forfeit ruling was issued without providing Iran with the formal notice and opportunity to respond that FIFA's own disciplinary framework requires before a forfeit decision can be validly imposed. The forfeit ruling was published at 11:30 at night as a written statement without a formal disciplinary hearing, without Iran being given the opportunity to present its position to the disciplinary panel before the ruling was issued, and without the procedural steps that FIFA's own rules specify must occur before a forfeit outcome can be formally recorded. This procedural argument is the strongest of the four because it is the most directly supported by FIFA's own documented rules. FIFA's disciplinary framework does not authorize the summary imposition of forfeit outcomes without the procedural steps it specifies. If the CAS finds that those steps were not followed, it has clear authority to invalidate the forfeit ruling on purely procedural grounds, regardless of whether any of Iran's substantive arguments are legally sound. The second argument is substantive, and it is the argument that has the most significant implications for the future of international football governance. Iran is arguing that FIFA's existing disciplinary framework was designed to address logistical non-appearance situations where a team fails to appear for a match because of operational failures, administrative errors, or willful disregard for tournament obligations, and that it was not designed to address geopolitical non-appearance. Situations where a team's non-appearance is the direct consequence of the geopolitical relationship between the team's nation and the host nation of the tournament. The distinction Iran is drawing is not merely semantic. It is legally significant because the purpose of the forfeit provision in FIFA's disciplinary framework is to deter teams from failing to appear without legitimate cause. The deterrence logic of the provision assumes that the team has the practical ability to appear and is choosing not to. When a team's non-appearance is the direct consequence of an active military conflict between its nation and the host nation, the deterrence logic does not apply in the same way because the team is not making a choice between appearing and not appearing in any meaningful sense. It is responding to a geopolitical reality that FIFA's institutional decisions contributed to creating. The third argument directly implicates FIFA's institutional conduct in the period between Iran's formal direct communication and Iran's non-appearance. Iran is arguing that FIFA's failure to implement the venue relocation solution that Mexico publicly offered and Iran formally endorsed constitutes a breach of FIFA's institutional obligations to its member federations. Those obligations include a duty to take reasonable steps to facilitate the participation of all qualified nations in the tournament. Iran is arguing that venue relocation was a reasonable step that was both available and explicitly endorsed by the relevant parties, and that FIFA's failure to implement it was an unreasonable institutional failure that directly caused Iran's non-appearance. This argument, if accepted by the CAS, would establish something that goes far beyond the Group G results. It would establish that FIFA has a legally binding institutional obligation to take reasonable steps to facilitate participation when geopolitical circumstances create participation barriers, and that failure to take those steps creates legal liability for the consequences of the participation barriers that reasonable steps could have removed. That established legal obligation would reshape FIFA's institutional responsibilities for every future tournament in ways that the organization's legal team understands very well, and that FIFA's public silence about this dimension of Iran's challenge suggests it is deeply concerned about. The fourth argument is the most ambitious and the least certain. Iran is arguing that the application of FIFA's forfeit provision to a geopolitical non-appearance situation without the development of specific rules governing such situations constitutes a violation of the principle of legal certainty that international sporting law requires FIFA to observe. The principle of legal certainty holds that institutions cannot apply punitive provisions to situations. Those provisions were not designed to address without first developing specific rules for those situations through the proper institutional processes. Iran is arguing that FIFA's application of the forfeit provision to geopolitical non-appearance without first developing specific rules for that category of situation is a violation of legal certainty that invalidates the forfeit ruling regardless of whether the ruling's outcome was substantively appropriate. Part 3. What each CAS outcome means for Group G and the tournament. If the CAS upholds FIFA's forfeit ruling in full, the Group G results stand as recorded. Belgium and Egypt advanced legitimately. New Zealand was eliminated legitimately. The teams currently in the knockout rounds whose paths ran through Group G continue their tournament with their group stage results intact. FIFA's application of existing disciplinary procedures to geopolitical non-appearance is validated as legally sound, and the institutional framework for handling future geopolitical refusal situations is the forfeit provision as applied in this case, a precedent that every future FIFA administration will be legally entitled to rely on. This outcome is the best possible outcome for FIFA from a short-term tournament management perspective. It resolves the legal uncertainty cleanly, validates the decisions FIFA made, and allows the tournament to conclude without the Group G results being formally contested. But it is also the outcome that establishes the weakest institutional framework for managing future geopolitical conflicts in international football, because it validates the application of a provision designed for logistical non-appearance to a fundamentally different category of situation, without requiring FIFA to develop specific rules for that category. If the CAS overturns FIFA's forfeit ruling in full, the consequences are the most dramatic and the most institutionally complex of any possible outcome. Full overturn means the Group G results as recorded are legally invalid. Belgium and Egypt's forfeit victories over Iran do not exist in the valid tournament record. New Zealand's elimination from Group G is based on a points total that does not include the forfeit loss that the overturned ruling imposed. The Group G standings must be recalculated without the forfeit results. Recalculating Group G without the forfeit results produces a group stage that has an inherent structural problem. 3 nations played matches against each other but not against Iran. The results of those matches determine the relative standing of Belgium, Egypt, and New Zealand among themselves. But the group stage points total that determines which 2 nations advance is based on matches against all group opponents, including Iran. Without Iran's matches, the points totals are based on 2 matches per nation rather than 3. The advancement calculation from a 2-match group stage produces different results than the advancement calculation from a 3-match group stage, and the CAS ruling that invalidates the forfeit results must specify how the advancement calculation should be conducted in the absence of the invalidated results. The teams currently in the knockout rounds whose paths ran through Group G are competing in matches whose legitimacy depends on Group G advancement decisions that a full CAS overturn would call into question. If Belgium advanced from Group G on the basis of points that included a forfeit victory that the CAS has now invalidated, Belgium's presence in the round it is currently competing in is based on an advancement decision that the valid points total does not support. The institutional complexity of managing that reality while the tournament is ongoing is a complexity that FIFA has no protocol for because no protocol has ever needed to exist for it. If the CAS modifies FIFA's forfeit ruling partially, the outcome is the most legally nuanced and the most operationally complex of the 3 possibilities. Partial modification means the CAS found some of Iran's arguments legally sound and others not. The specific contours of the modification depend entirely on which arguments the CAS accepts and what remedy it determines is appropriate for the specific legal violations it identifies. The most likely partial modification scenario based on the relative strength of Iran's 4 arguments is a ruling that finds the procedural argument and the institutional conduct argument legally sound while declining to rule on the broader substantive and legal certainty arguments. A ruling on those 2 grounds would find that FIFA's forfeit ruling was procedurally defective because the required disciplinary process was not followed, and that FIFA's institutional failure to implement the available venue relocation solution was a breach of FIFA's obligations to Iran as a member federation. The remedy for those findings would not necessarily require invalidating the Group GE results in full. The CIS could order FIFA to conduct a proper disciplinary hearing with Iran's participation before any forfeit outcome is formally recorded in the tournament record. It could order FIFA to pay Iran compensation for the institutional failures that contributed to its non-appearance. And it could establish formal institutional guidelines for how FIFA must handle future situations involving the intersection of geopolitical conflicts and tournament participation. Part 4. The teams caught in the middle and what they deserve. Belgium qualified from Group G. Egypt qualified from Group G. New Zealand was eliminated from Group G. None of those outcomes were produced by those teams' choices about Iran's situation. Belgium's players did not decide that Iran's matches should be scheduled exclusively in the United States. Egypt's players did not decide that FIFA should decline to implement the venue relocation solution that Mexico offered. New Zealand's players did not decide that FIFA's forfeit ruling should be issued at 11:30 at night without the procedural steps FIFA's own rules require. These teams showed up. They played the matches that were scheduled. They competed to the best of their ability in a group stage that had been structurally compromised by institutional decisions they had no part in making. And they are now competing in or watching from home a tournament whose group stage record is under active legal challenge in ways that affect their own tournament histories without any action or decision of their own having contributed to the situation. That reality is the human cost of institutional failure that gets lost in the legal and administrative complexity of the CAS process. The players, coaches, and supporters of Belgium, Egypt, and New Zealand are not parties to Iran's legal challenge. They are the people most directly affected by its outcome. A full CAS overturn does not punish FIFA. It punishes the teams whose group stage results are invalidated. It punishes the fans whose nation's tournament journeys are retroactively contested. It punishes the football itself for the institutional failures of the organization responsible for governing it. This is the deepest injustice embedded in the situation that FIFA's 6 weeks of inaction produced. The institutional failure is FIFA's. The consequences of that failure are distributed across everyone involved in the tournament except the institution that failed. Iran's players carry the weight of not having competed. Belgium, Egypt, and New Zealand carry the weight of competing under legal uncertainty. The fans of all 4 nations carry the weight of a group stage whose results exist in a state of formal contestation. And FIFA carries the weight of a CAS process whose outcome it cannot control, and whose most damaging possible results it could have avoided by implementing a venue relocation solution that was available, endorsed, and never implemented. Part 5. What the ruling will mean when it arrives. The CAS ruling will arrive, not before the trophy is lifted, but after it. And when it arrives, it will produce consequences that extend far beyond the Group G results it addresses directly. It will establish the legal framework that governs how FIFA handles geopolitical conflicts in international football for every tournament that follows this one. The 2030 World Cup spans 3 continents. The 2034 World Cup is hosted in a region with its own complex geopolitical relationships with participating nations. Every future tournament will face situations where the intersection of geopolitics and football creates participation challenges that the 2026 experience will be the permanent reference point for managing. If the CAS upholds FIFA's ruling, that reference point says that existing forfeit provisions apply to geopolitical non-appearance without modification. If the CAS overturns or modifies FIFA's ruling, that reference point says that geopolitical non-appearance requires specific institutional frameworks that FIFA must develop and apply before reaching for the forfeit provision. The difference between those 2 reference points is the difference between a future of international football governed by rules designed for the situations they address and a future governed by rules applied to situations they were never designed for. Iran's legal challenge is not just about Group G. It is about what kind of institution FIFA will be required to be for the next generation of tournaments. And the answer to that question will be written by a court in Lausanne on a timeline that the tournament currently being played cannot control. Every Group G result is under legal threat. Every knockout round match whose path ran through Group G is being competed under a cloud of legal uncertainty that the teams competing in it did not create and cannot resolve. And every fan watching those matches deserves to understand that what they are watching exists in a legal context that has not yet been fully determined. Drop your comment right now. Which CAS outcome do you think is most likely, and which outcome do you think is most just? Subscribe and stay with us, because when the ruling lands, we will be here to tell you exactly what it means for every result it affects and every future tournament it shapes. The ruling is coming, and when it does, nothing about how you understand this tournament will be the